These papers prove your corruption. You won't get away with this.
All right, break it up. What's going on here?
The phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m., cutting through the silence of my empty farmhouse like a rusty blade. I'd been nursing a beer and staring at divorce papers when Maddie's terrified whisper crackled through the speaker. "Dad, he hit Mom with a hammer. Now he's looking for me with a taser." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Background noise told the story: crashing furniture, Vanessa screaming, heavy footsteps thundering upstairs. My 8-year-old daughter was hiding somewhere in that chaos, 15 miles away in the house that used to be mine. "Maddie, where are you hiding?" I was already grabbing keys, boots, anything. "Bedroom closet, behind the winter coats." Her voice barely audible. "Dad, I'm scared." "Stay quiet, baby. Daddy's coming." I should have seen this coming. Should have known Greg Larkin was a powder keg waiting to explode. The perfect local cop who'd stolen my wife 6 months ago wasn't just a cheating bastard, he was dangerous. But Vanessa had painted me as the problem, the angry ex-husband who couldn't let go. The pickup truck roared to life, gravel spraying as I tore down the driveway. 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, I could be there. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. This was supposed to be Vanessa's new life. The successful real estate agent and her heroic police officer boyfriend living in suburban bliss while I rotted alone in the old farmhouse. The whole town of Millfield had watched our marriage implode with the enthusiasm of spectators at a demolition derby. My phone rang again. Unknown number. "Cal Becker?" A woman's voice, shaky. "Yeah. This is Mrs. Henderson, your neighbor on Maple Street. I called 911. There's screaming coming from your old house." "I'm almost there. The police are coming too. That Officer Larkin's car is in the driveway." Of course it was. Greg was the police in this situation. Who was going to arrest him? Himself? I floored the accelerator, my ancient Ford protesting as it hit 70 on the winding coastal road. Pine trees blurred past in the darkness. The ocean smell mixed with my cold sweat. Vanessa had been the town's golden girl, beautiful, successful, connected. When she decided I wasn't good enough anymore, the story wrote itself. Poor Vanessa, trapped with an angry handyman who couldn't appreciate her ambitions. Thank God for Greg Larkin, swooping in to save her. Except Greg Larkin was currently terrorizing my daughter with a taser. I screeched into the driveway behind 2 police cruisers, their red and blue lights painting the house in hellish colors. The front door hung open, spilling warm light onto the porch where I used to sit with Maddie, reading bedtime stories. Greg emerged as I jumped from the truck, his uniform perfectly pressed, despite the chaos. Behind him, Vanessa dabbed at a small cut on her forehead with a dish towel. "Cal, thank God you're here," she called out, her voice dripping with false relief. "There was a break-in. Someone attacked us." I stared at her, then at Greg's smug face. "Where's Maddie?" "She's fine," Greg said, stepping between us. "Scared, but fine. We handled the situation." "I want to see my daughter." "She's giving her statement to Officer Martinez," Vanessa said. "This has been traumatic enough without you charging in here." The rage built slowly, like water behind a dam. These two had orchestrated this entire scene. Greg probably started the fight, Vanessa played victim, and now they'd spin it as a home invasion. Meanwhile, my daughter had been genuinely terrified, hiding in a closet while her mother's boyfriend waved a weapon around. "What happened to your forehead?" I asked Vanessa. "The intruder hit me with a hammer from the garage," she said quickly. Too quickly. Greg nodded. "Lucky I was here. Could have been much worse." I looked at the hammer lying on the porch steps. My hammer, from the tool shed I'd built with my own hands. The same tool shed where Greg and Vanessa had been meeting for months before I found out. "Dad!" Maddie burst through the door and ran to me, wrapping her small arms around my waist. She was shaking. Over her head, I caught Officer Martinez's eye. He looked uncomfortable, like a man who'd heard a story that didn't quite add up. "Can I take my daughter home?" I asked. "Not tonight," Greg said firmly. "She's a witness, needs to stay with her mother." "The hell she does." "Cal." Vanessa's voice carried that familiar tone of condescending patience. "Don't make this about us. Maddie needs stability right now." Stability. From the woman whose boyfriend had just chased our daughter around the house with a taser. But I was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. Greg wore the badge. Vanessa had the sympathetic neighbors. I was just the bitter ex-husband causing trouble. As I walked back to my truck, Maddie slipped something into my hand. A folded piece of paper, small enough to hide in her palm. I didn't open it until I was back on the dark road, pulled over at a gas station under harsh fluorescent lights. "Please help me. He hurt Mom, but she won't tell. I saw everything." Emmy. Below that, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, they were fighting about Kyle. Kyle. I'd heard that name whispered in Ruby's bar, seen the looks when Vanessa walked into the hardware store. Kyle Morrison, her real estate colleague. The one with the expensive car and designer suits. I folded the note and slipped it into my wallet. Then I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the ocean waves crash against the rocks in the distance. The hammer had fallen tonight, all right, but not the way Greg and Vanessa had planned. Ruby's Blue Lobster Tavern smelled like cigarettes, fried clams, and 30 years of spilled beer. At 8 in the morning, it was the perfect place for a man to drink coffee and listen to a town wake up with gossip on its lips. "Heard there was some excitement at your old place last night," Ruby said, sliding a steaming mug across the scarred wooden bar. She was 60-something, gray-haired, and knew every secret in Millfield before the people involved knew them themselves. "Someone broke in," I said carefully. "Scared Maddie pretty bad." "Uh-huh." Ruby's eyes were sharp as broken glass. Funny thing about break-ins, usually they take stuff. I sipped my coffee and waited. Ruby would tell me what she'd heard, whether I asked or not. "Mrs. Henderson called me at midnight," she continued, wiping down glasses that were already clean. "Said it sounded like World War III over there. Screaming, crashing, the whole 9 yards. Greg handled it." "I bet he did." Ruby's voice carried enough sarcasm to float a lobster boat. "That boy's been handling a lot of things lately." The door chimed as Vern Walsh shuffled in, his hardware store coveralls already stained with paint and motor oil despite the early hour. He'd been my best friend since high school, back when we thought working with our hands was something to be proud of. "Cal." He nodded, taking the stool beside me. "Heard about last night. Good news travels fast. Bad news travels faster." Vern ordered coffee, then lowered his voice. "Martinez came by the store 20 minutes ago. Bought a pack of cigarettes and looked like he wanted to say something. Officer Martinez had been walking a beat in Millfield for 15 years. He knew the difference between a real crime scene and theater." "What kind of something?" "The kind that makes a good cop uncomfortable." Vern lit his first cigarette of the day. "He asked me how long you and Vanessa have been divorced." "We're not divorced yet, just separated." That's what I told him. Then he asked about Greg's temper. Ruby leaned closer, pretending to organize bottles. "Martinez has been asking questions all over town. Started at the diner, then the post office." "What kind of questions?" "Whether anyone's seen Greg get violent. Whether Vanessa's been sporting any mysterious bruises lately." Ruby's voice dropped to a whisper. "And whether it's true about her and Kyle Morrison." There it was, the name from Maddie's note. "What about Kyle Morrison?" Vern and Ruby exchanged a look. "You really don't know?" Ruby asked. "Know what?" "Your wife's been playing both sides of the fence," Vern said bluntly. "Greg thinks he's the only one, but Kyle's been sniffing around since before you two separated." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "How long have you known?" "Month or two," Ruby admitted. Didn't seem like my place to say anything. Plus, you were already dealing with enough, Vern added. I stared into my coffee mug, watching steam rise like smoke signals. Vanessa wasn't just cheating on me, she was cheating on the man she'd cheated with. And Greg, for all his swagger and authority, was as clueless as I'd been. There's more, Ruby said quietly. Kyle's been asking around about your property, wants to know if it's for sale. It's not. That's not what Vanessa's been telling people. The farmhouse had been in my family for 3 generations, 40 acres of prime coastal land, worth more now than my grandfather could have imagined when he built the place with his own hands. Vanessa had always hated it. Too isolated, too old-fashioned, too much work. But it was mine. The only thing in this whole mess that was still mine. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Need to talk. Meet me at the marina. 2 p.m. Come alone. Martinez. I showed the message to Vern and Ruby. Could be a trap, Vern said. Could be the break you need, Ruby countered. Martinez is a good cop. If he's reaching out, there's a reason. I finished my coffee and left money on the bar. Either way, I'll find out at 2. The morning crawled by like a wounded animal. I tried to work in my shop, sanding cabinet doors for a kitchen renovation, but my hands shook every time I thought about Maddie hiding in that closet. At 1:45, I drove to Millfield Marina. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few pickup trucks belonging to lobstermen checking their traps. Martinez sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, still in uniform, but somehow looking smaller than he had the night before. Thanks for coming, he said as I approached. Thanks for asking. I sat down beside him. What's on your mind? Martinez was quiet for a long moment, watching seagulls dive for scraps around the fishing boats. 20 years I've been doing this job, he finally said. Seen a lot of domestic situations. Last night felt wrong. Wrong how? Your daughter's story doesn't match what Greg and Vanessa told me. Martinez pulled out a small notebook. Maddie said she heard her mother and Greg fighting about money, about selling something. Then Greg got angry and threw a hammer. At Vanessa? At the wall, but it bounced back and caught her in the forehead. Martinez flipped a page. She also said Greg was looking for papers, something about the house. My house. They were fighting about my house. There's something else, Martinez continued. I've been getting calls about Greg, complaints about him being aggressive during routine stops, using excessive force. Why are you telling me this? Martinez closed his notebook and looked at me directly. Because I think your family's in danger, and because Greg Larkin has friends in the department who won't listen to concerns about one of their own. A cold wind blew off the harbor, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. In the distance, storm clouds were building on the horizon. What do you need from me? I asked. Evidence, something concrete that proves Greg's been abusing his authority. Martinez stood up. And be careful, Cal. Greg's not just a bad cop. He's a smart bad cop. That makes him dangerous. As Martinez walked back to his cruiser, I sat alone on the bench and watched the storm clouds roll in from the Atlantic. The hammer had fallen once last night, but I had a feeling it was going to fall again, and this time I wanted to be the one holding it. The elementary school parking lot buzzed with the usual chaos of afternoon pickup. Soccer moms in SUVs, working fathers checking their phones, kids streaming out of brick buildings like colorful ants. I spotted Maddie immediately. She had my stubborn chin and Vanessa's blonde hair, a combination that made her stand out in any crowd. She ran to my truck with a backpack bouncing on her shoulders, but her smile seemed forced. Hey, kiddo. I ruffled her hair as she climbed into the passenger seat. How was school? Okay, I guess. She buckled her seatbelt carefully, the way I'd taught her. Mrs. Patterson asked me about last night. What did you tell her? That there was a break-in, and I got scared. Maddie looked out the window. I didn't tell her about Greg and Mom fighting. Smart kid. Too smart for 8 years old. Maddie, what you wrote in that note last night about Kyle. What did you mean? She was quiet for a moment, picking at the strap of her backpack. Mom has been seeing Kyle at the house when Greg's at work, she said finally. They think I don't know, but I do. Kyle brings her flowers and they go upstairs. The steering wheel creaked under my grip. How long has this been going on? Since before you moved out. Her voice was small. I heard them talking once. Kyle said something about getting rid of you so they could sell the farm. Getting rid of me. The words echoed in my head as I drove toward the farmhouse, Maddie chattering about a spelling test and a field trip to the aquarium. Normal 8-year-old concerns in a world that had become anything but normal. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the black sedan parked at the end of my driveway. Kyle Morrison stepped out as I pulled up to the house. He looked exactly like what he was, a slick real estate agent in an expensive suit, the kind of man who sold dreams to people who couldn't afford them. Cal, good to see you. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Mind if we talk? Daddy, who is that? Maddie whispered. Go inside, sweetheart. There's juice boxes in the fridge. She hesitated, then grabbed her backpack and ran toward the house. Kyle watched her go with calculating eyes. Beautiful daughter, he said. Must be hard, all this upheaval in her life. What do you want, Kyle? To help. He pulled a manila folder from his car. I've been working with Vanessa on some options for this property. The market's hot right now. We could get you a very good price. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Cal. It's just a matter of finding the right number. Kyle opened the folder, revealing glossy photographs of my property taken from multiple angles. Coastal land like this? You're sitting on a gold mine. I flipped through the photos. Someone had done their homework. Aerial shots, surveyor's measurements, even pictures of the interior of my house. Pictures that could only have been taken by someone with access. How did you get these? Vanessa provided them. As your wife, she has certain legal rights regarding marital property. Soon-to-be ex-wife. The divorce isn't final yet. Kyle's smile never wavered. Look, I understand this is emotional. The house has been in your family for generations, but sentiment doesn't pay bills. I pay my bills just fine. Do you? Kyle pulled out another sheet of paper. Because I've been looking at the tax records. Property taxes on 40 acres of waterfront land aren't cheap, and with the town reassessing values, the number at the bottom of the page made my stomach drop. The tax assessment had tripled. That's impossible. It's public record. The town council voted last month to bring all coastal properties up to current market value. Kyle's voice carried false sympathy. I'm afraid your tax bill is going to be quite a shock. I stared at the assessment notice. There was no way I could afford those taxes on a handyman's income. Kyle was right about one thing. The property was worth a fortune. But only if I sold it. This is convenient timing, I said slowly. How so? The assessment, Vanessa's sudden interest in selling, your involvement. I closed the folder and handed it back. Feels like a setup. Kyle's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. I'm trying to help you, Cal. But if you want to lose everything to the tax man, that's your choice. He got back in his sedan. The offer stands. For now. As his car disappeared down the road, I stood in my driveway and looked at the farmhouse with new eyes. The white clapboard siding needed paint. The roof had a few loose shingles. The barn leaned slightly to the left, held up more by habit than structural integrity. But it was mine. My grandfather had built it with his hands and his sweat. My father had raised me here, taught me the difference between honest work and shortcuts. And I'd be damned if I'd let Vanessa and her boyfriend steal it from me. Inside, Maddie was sitting at the kitchen table with a juice box and her homework. Was that Kyle? She asked without looking up from her math worksheet. Yeah. How did you know his name? Mom talks about him a lot. She erased something and rewrote it. She says he's going to make us rich. What do you think about that? Maddie looked up at me with eyes too old for her face. I think Kyle's mean, she said simply. And I think Mom's scared of Greg. Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, after Maddie was asleep, I sat in my workshop with the tax assessment and a calculator. No matter how I ran the numbers, they didn't work. Even if I took every job in town, worked 7 days a week, I couldn't afford the new tax bill. Kyle Morrison had done his homework. They all had. But they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed I'd go quietly. My phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. Cal, we need to talk. About what? About Maddie. About the house. About ending this mess before it gets worse. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow at the diner. Noon. The line went silent. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then walked to the window overlooking my 40 acres of gold mine. In the distance, storm clouds were building again, and the wind carried the smell of rain. The hammer was about to fall for the second time. But this time, I planned to be ready. Millfield Diner at noon was a symphony of clinking silverware and small-town gossip. Vanessa sat in a corner booth, looking perfectly put together despite everything that had happened. She'd always been beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads at the grocery store and made other wives feel inadequate. But today, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way her eyes darted toward the door every few minutes. The careful makeup that didn't quite hide the bruise on her temple. The nervous habit of twisting her wedding ring. The ring she still wore despite everything. You look tired, she said, as I slid into the booth across from her. Funny thing about having your daughter terrorized by your boyfriend. Tends to keep a man awake. Vanessa flinched. Greg lost his temper. It won't happen again. You're right. It won't. I signaled the waitress for coffee. Because you're going to end it. It's not that simple, Cal. Sure it is. You pack your bags, take Maddie, and get away from him. And go where? Do what? Vanessa's voice rose slightly, then dropped as she noticed other diners looking our way. I have a life here, a business. You have a daughter who's afraid to sleep in her own bed. The waitress brought my coffee and refilled Vanessa's cup. We sat in silence until she was gone. Kyle made you an offer on the house, Vanessa said finally. Kyle can take his offer and shove it. Cal, be reasonable. We could split the money, start fresh somewhere else. We? You and Maddie. You could buy something smaller, more manageable. Vanessa reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. You could be happy. I pulled my hand away. What about you and Greg? And Kyle? Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something desperate underneath. That's complicated. I bet it is. I leaned back in the booth. How long have you been juggling both of them? I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. Greg thinks he's your knight in shining armor, but Kyle's the one with the real money. The question is, which one knows about the other? Vanessa's face went pale. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. She looked around the diner nervously, then leaned forward and spoke in a whisper. Greg's not just possessive, Cal, he's dangerous. And Kyle has connections. People who don't take no for an answer. What kind of connections? The kind that make problems disappear. A chill ran down my spine. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to protect you and Maddie. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears that might have been genuine. If you don't sell the house, if you keep fighting this... What? Accidents happen, especially to stubborn men who don't know when to quit. I stared at her across the table. This woman I'd loved, married, built a life with, the mother of my child. And she was sitting in a public diner, threatening my life over real estate. You've changed, Nessa. I've grown up. I've learned how the world really works. She wiped her eyes carefully, preserving her makeup. Money talks, Cal. Everything else is just noise. Including our daughter? Maddie will be fine. She'll adapt. Kids do. I stood up and threw a $5 bill on the table. You're wrong about that, and you're wrong about me. Cal, wait. She grabbed my arm as I started to leave. There's something else. Something you need to know. I sat back down. The tax assessment wasn't random, she said quietly. Kyle has friends on the town council. The whole thing was orchestrated to force you to sell. I figured that much. But there's more. Greg doesn't know about Kyle's involvement. He thinks this is all his idea, getting me away from you, starting fresh. So you're playing them against each other. I'm trying to survive. Vanessa's voice cracked. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to become the kind of person who lies and manipulates and threatens? Nobody forced you to cheat. You forced me. The words came out louder than she intended, causing heads to turn throughout the diner. She lowered her voice again. You were content to stay in that old house forever, fixing other people's problems for pocket change. I wanted more. More what? More everything. More money, more respect, more life. She gathered her purse and stood up. The offer stands, Cal. But not for long. Kyle's investors are getting impatient. What investors? But she was already walking away, her heels clicking on the diner's checkered floor. Through the window, I watched her get into her car and drive toward town. I sat in the booth for another 10 minutes, drinking coffee and thinking. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture I didn't like. Vanessa wasn't just cheating, she was in over her head with dangerous people. Greg wasn't just a bad cop, he was an unwitting pawn in someone else's game. And Kyle Morrison wasn't just a real estate agent, he was the front man for something bigger. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Stop digging or start digging your own grave. I looked around the diner, but nobody seemed to be paying attention to me. The message could have come from anyone, anywhere, but the meaning was clear enough. I paid my check and walked out into the afternoon sunshine. Storm clouds were building again on the horizon, and the wind carried the smell of rain and something else, something that reminded me of fear. As I drove back to the farmhouse, I thought about Vanessa's tears and threats, about Kyle's calculating smile, about Greg's violent temper. They all thought they had me cornered, trapped between financial ruin and physical danger. They were about to learn that cornering a man with nothing left to lose was a very dangerous game. 3 days later, I was ready. The plan had come together piece by piece, like a complicated carpentry project. Every joint had to be perfect, every measurement exact, or the whole thing would collapse. It started with Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor who'd called 911 the night Greg terrorized Maddie. She was a retired librarian with sharp eyes and a sharper memory, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing. I've been keeping a log, she told me as we sat on her porch, watching the sun set over the harbor. Every time Greg's car is at Vanessa's house when he should be on duty, every time Kyle visits, every time there's shouting. She handed me a composition notebook filled with dates, times, and detailed observations written in perfect librarian handwriting. Why? I asked. Because I don't like bullies, she said simply, and because Maddie deserves better. The notebook was damning. Greg had been using his patrol car for personal visits during work hours. Kyle had been meeting with men in expensive cars at odd hours, and Vanessa had been hosting both of them, sometimes on the same day. But I needed more than an old woman's observations. That's where Vern came in. You want me to what? He asked when I outlined my plan. Bug the house, just long enough to get them talking. Cal, that's illegal. So is police brutality. So is conspiracy to commit fraud. I spread Mrs. Henderson's notebook on his workbench. Look at this pattern. They're planning something big. Vern studied the entries, his mechanic's mind working through the implications. You really think they'd hurt you? I think they'd hurt anyone who got in their way. I thought about Vanessa's tears in the diner, about the text message warning me to stop digging. The question is whether we're going to let them. It took Vern 2 days to set up the surveillance. Tiny wireless microphones, no bigger than shirt buttons, placed in strategic locations throughout the house that used to be mine. The audio fed to a receiver in his workshop, where we could monitor and record everything. We didn't have to wait long. On Friday evening, Kyle's sedan pulled into Vanessa's driveway just as Greg was leaving for his night shift. They passed each other on the road, the cop and the real estate agent, both thinking they were the only one. 20 minutes later, Kyle and Vanessa were arguing in the living room. "He's becoming a problem." Kyle's voice came through the speakers clearly. "The stubborn bastard won't take the hint." "Cal's always been stubborn," Vanessa replied, "but he's not stupid. He'll sell when he realizes he has no choice. My investors don't want to wait for him to realize anything. They want that land now." "What kind of investors need 40 acres of farmland so badly?" Kyle's laugh was cold. "The kind that build casinos." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about real estate development. It was about gambling. Kyle's mysterious investors wanted to build a casino on my property, probably with connections to the new tribal gaming compact the state had been negotiating. "A casino?" Vanessa's voice was surprised. "You told me it was going to be condominiums." "I told you what you needed to hear. The casino will bring in 50 times more money than condos." "What about the town zoning laws?" "What about them? Money talks, zoning laws walk. We've already got 3 council members in our pocket." There was a long pause. Then Vanessa spoke again, her voice smaller. "What if Cal still won't sell? Then we move to Plan B. Which is? Let's just say your boyfriend Greg has a very bad temper, and accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit." Vern and I looked at each other across his cluttered workshop. We'd just heard Kyle Morrison threaten my life, recorded on digital audio with perfect clarity. But the conversation wasn't over. "I don't want Cal hurt," Vanessa said. "Whatever else has happened between us, he's Maddie's father." Touching, but irrelevant. Kyle's voice was flat, businesslike. "Your husband is standing between us and $100 million development. That makes him expendable. And if I don't go along with this, then you become expendable too." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Vanessa had gotten herself involved with people who killed for money, and now she was trapped. "There's more," Kyle continued. "Greg doesn't know about the casino. He thinks this is all about getting you away from Cal and starting fresh. When the time comes, he'll have to be dealt with too." "Dealt with how?" "Cops die in the line of duty all the time, especially cops who ask too many questions." I'd heard enough. Kyle Morrison wasn't just a corrupt real estate agent. He was planning to murder both me and Greg to clear the way for his casino project. And he was using my wife as bait to make it happen. "We need to call Martinez," I said. "With what? Illegally obtained recordings?" Vern shook his head. "They'll never hold up in court." "Then we don't go to court. We go public." "What do you mean?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I mean, we let the whole town know what Kyle Morrison really is, and we let Greg Larkin know he's being played for a fool." "That's dangerous, Cal. These people have already threatened to kill you." "They threatened to kill me quietly. There's a difference." I stood up and stretched, feeling better than I had in months. Time to make some noise. The hammer was about to fall for the 3rd time, but this time, I was the one holding it. And this time, I wasn't going to miss. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with a sharp wind blowing in from the Atlantic. Perfect weather for the Millfield Harvest Festival, the biggest event of the year in our little town. Main Street was blocked off for vendors selling everything from lobster rolls to handmade quilts. A small stage had been set up in the town square, where local musicians would perform throughout the day. By noon, half the town would be there, including Kyle Morrison, who was scheduled to give a presentation about exciting new development opportunities in Millfield. I arrived early and set up my own booth, a simple card table with a hand-painted sign reading, "Truth About Development." Vern helped me arrange speakers and a portable sound system, powered by a car battery hidden under the table. "You sure about this?" he asked as we tested the microphone. Too late to back out now. Ruby appeared at my elbow, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing a grin that could have lit up the harbor. "Heard you might be making some noise today," she said. "Where did you hear that?" "Honey, I know everything that happens in this town before it happens." She poured coffee into 3 paper cups. "What do you need from me?" "Just keep your ears open, and maybe spread the word that people should stick around for Kyle's presentation." "Oh, they'll stick around, trust me." By 11 o'clock, Main Street was packed with families enjoying the festival. Kids ran between booths with cotton candy and balloons. Parents browsed local crafts and caught up with neighbors. It felt like the kind of small-town gathering that Norman Rockwell would have painted. Kyle Morrison arrived at 11:30, looking confident and polished in his expensive suit. He was accompanied by 2 men I didn't recognize, big, quiet types who looked like they'd be more comfortable in a casino than at a harvest festival. Vanessa appeared a few minutes later, holding Maddie's hand. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the crowd as if she was looking for an escape route. Greg was working security, his uniform crisp and his badge gleaming in the autumn sunshine. He nodded to Kyle with professional courtesy, completely unaware that the man he was protecting had already marked him for ruin. At exactly noon, Kyle took the stage. "Good afternoon, Millfield." His voice boomed through the sound system. "It's great to see so many familiar faces here today." The crowd applauded politely. Kyle launched into his presentation, talking about economic development and job creation, about bringing prosperity to our little coastal town. I waited until he was in full swing, painting a picture of condominiums and shopping centers that would transform Millfield into a tourist destination. Then I turned on my own sound system. Kyle's recorded voice filled the town square, crystal clear and unmistakably damning. "Money talks, zoning laws walk. We've already got 3 council members in our pocket." The crowd went silent. Kyle stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale as he realized what was happening. But I wasn't done. The next recording played, "Your husband is standing between us and $100 million development. That makes him expendable." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned to stare at Kyle, then at Vanessa, then at me. I saw Greg pushing through the crowd, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. The final recording was the most damning. Cops die in the line of duty all the time, especially cops who ask too many questions. Greg stopped in his tracks, his face a mask of confusion and growing rage. He looked at Kyle, then at Vanessa, then back at Kyle. "What the hell is this?" Kyle shouted into his microphone, but his voice was drowned out by the murmur of the crowd. I took my own microphone and stepped forward. "This is the truth about Kyle Morrison's development plans," I said. "He's not building condominiums. He's building a casino, and he's willing to kill anyone who gets in his way." The crowd erupted. People shouted questions, demanded answers. Kyle's 2 companions moved toward the stage, but they were blocked by angry townspeople. Greg reached Kyle first, his face twisted with fury. "You son of a jerk!" he snarled, grabbing Kyle by the lapels. "You were going to have me killed?" "It's not what it sounds like," Kyle stammered, but his protests were lost in the chaos. I saw Vanessa trying to slip away through the crowd, dragging Maddie behind her. But Mrs. Henderson intercepted them, her elderly frame surprisingly effective at blocking their escape. "I don't think so, dear," she said firmly. "I think you have some explaining to do." Officer Martinez appeared beside me, his notebook already out. "I'm going to need copies of those recordings," he said. "Already burned to CD." I handed him a disc. "Everything's there." "This is illegally obtained evidence," Kyle shouted from the stage. where Greg still had him by the shirt. "It won't hold up in court." "Maybe not," Martinez replied. "But it's enough for a federal investigation. Conspiracy, racketeering, threats of violence against a police officer." He smiled grimly. "I think the FBI will be very interested in your casino project." The festival had turned into something between a town meeting and a lynch mob. People were shouting questions about the casino, about the corrupt council members, about Kyle's mysterious investors. In the middle of it all, I saw Maddie break free from Vanessa and run toward me. I scooped her up in my arms, holding her tight as chaos swirled around us. "Is it over, Daddy?" she whispered in my ear. "Yeah, kiddo, it's over." And it was. Kyle Morrison was arrested on the spot, along with his two companions. The FBI arrived the next day and began a full investigation into the casino project and its backers. 3 town council members resigned in disgrace. Greg Larkin was suspended pending an internal affairs investigation, though the recordings actually helped his case by proving he was an unwitting pawn rather than a willing conspirator. Vanessa agreed to a divorce settlement that left me with the farmhouse and full custody of Maddie. She moved to Portland and started over, this time without any boyfriends connected to organized crime. The tax assessment was quietly revised back to reasonable levels after the FBI investigation revealed the corruption behind it. And I kept my family's land, all 40 acres of it, where my daughter could grow up surrounded by honest work and clean air and the sound of waves crashing against ancient rocks. The hammer had fallen twice, once in violence, once in justice.